My son saved up $400 to help his best friend's father who passed away. My stepdaughter took that money, and my wife lied to the police to cover for her. 2 days ago, Jay showed up at my work crying, completely devastated. He told me that Kay, my stepdaughter, came home with shopping bags after a spree. When he went to check his room, the money he had worked so hard to save was gone. Kay doesn't work, and whenever she gets a little money, she makes sure to spend it all as if it's burning a hole in her hand. My boss, seeing my desperation, let me leave early, and I went home to understand where that money had come from. She claimed it was hers. I asked her to be honest, but she just told me to stay out of it. Meanwhile, Jay was working hard at a pizzeria, saving every penny because he wanted to gather enough to surprise his best friend's father, who died last year. This would be the first birthday without his son, and the boys decided to pool some money together to give the father a special weekend, helping with gas, food, everything. Most boys would think about saving for their first car or new clothes, but Jay just wanted to support his friend's grieving father. I chose not to argue with Kay and instead checked the camera footage we used to keep an eye on the dogs. You could only see the lower half of her, but it was obviously Kay entering his room. In this house, one rule never changes. No one enters anyone else's room. It's a matter of respect. I showed Kay the footage of her entering Jay's room. I told her she needed to return everything, but she tangled herself in 1,000 excuses. She said she was also saving money. She tried to claim someone had broken into the house, anything to avoid admitting it. When her mother arrived, she cried, saying we were against her. I showed the video to my wife and explained what happened. Finally, Kay admitted it and even said, "Why does he have to keep all this money anyway?" I told my wife she needed to make Kay return it, but she wouldn't accept it. She said it would be embarrassing to return the purchases and that when Kay got a job, she would pay Jay back. She claimed it would be worse if her daughter was arrested for stealing $400. We fought, and I made it clear that Kay broke an essential house rule and committed a crime. Kay is 19, doesn't help with anything, so I said she had to leave. My wife then simply said, "If you kick her out, I'm going too." I asked if she would cover the stolen amount, force Kay to return the items, or help with the rent, but the answer was just no. They packed their bags and left. I wasn't going to pull the bags out of Kay's hands by force. It wouldn't be smart to start a fight. I also didn't have extra money to cover what was stolen and ensure Jay could go on the trip. He didn't even eat dinner properly because he was so sad. The next day, I called the police. The officer said he would call my wife and give her 2 options: bring Kay to the station for a talk or return the purchases and reimburse Jay, just to see if it would scare them, since in practice it's a civil matter. My wife had the nerve to tell the officer that she herself had given the money to her daughter. With no way to prove the money was Jay's and the only evidence being the video of Kay entering the room, there was nothing to be done. I was indignant seeing my son's heart break inside the station. Crying, he asked, "Why did they do this to me? What was the point of all this? I just wanted to help my friend's dad." I had to talk to him about not being so trusting and not keeping money in his room, but it never crossed his mind that he would be betrayed within his own family. Meanwhile, my wife and Kay are being taken in by relatives with all the help they need, and nothing has changed for them. But last night, Jay's friend's father called. He said the boys told him everything and he wanted to talk to me. What he said changed everything, and right there I saw how this was going to end. He spoke softly, emotionally, and explained that his son had a small life insurance policy that the school offered to all students, but most didn't pay attention to it. The boy had filled everything out himself and named his father as the beneficiary. Along with the papers, the father found a note from his son written before everything happened. The boy wrote that he wanted his father to travel, to be happy again, that he didn't want him to be left only with longing and sadness. When I heard that, I had to sit down. A boy so young organized things thinking about his father's well-being even after he was gone. He was only 17 when he died. while others only think about parties, college, and video games, and he was trying to ease his father's pain. The man told me with a choking voice that he didn't think it was fair for his son to have worried about him even at the worst moment. Reading the note breaks his heart, but also makes him proud. He said he planned to use part of that money for this trip, that he would cover everything for Jay and the boys, including food and the hotel, all on him. When I started to say it wasn't necessary, he cut me off and said his son would be angry if Jay missed the trip because of what Kay did, that he considered Jay like another son, that they were all family, and that he wouldn't let a theft ruin what the boys had prepared for his son. I insisted I didn't want to cause trouble, that the problem was ours, but he wouldn't hear it. He said the trip was going to happen anyway and that Jay had to be ready. I stood paralyzed with the phone in my hand after he hung up. This man lost his son, lives a pain no parent wants to experience, and yet he thought of my son. He went out of his way to ensure he wouldn't miss such an important moment. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I felt the weight of his generosity. Kay thought she would get away with it. My wife thought she had solved everything by protecting her daughter, but Jay's friend's father showed what true character is, putting others first even in the midst of pain. I got up determined and went straight to Jay's room because he needed to know there are still good people in the world and that his friend's father wasn't going to let this slide. I walked into the room without knocking. I saw Jay lying down, staring at the ceiling, his eyes still red and swollen from crying. The room was immersed in a sadness that is hard to describe. He didn't even look up when I entered. I went to the bed, sat on the edge, and told him I had just spoken with Ben, his friend's father. Jay didn't even move. I told him the trip was still happening, that Ben insisted on paying for everything so Jay and the others could go this weekend. Only then did he slowly turn his face toward me. He said, "You don't have to make anything up just so I don't feel bad. It's fine if the trip isn't happening anymore." His voice was hollow, emotionless, completely discouraged. I showed him the message Ben had sent me on my phone. He said it would be an honor to take the boys, that his son would want to see everyone together. Jay just sat there, looking at the screen for a long time, until his face crumpled and he started crying again. But this time was different. It wasn't that desperate cry from the night before, but a mix of relief, sadness, and gratitude all at once. Jay sat up and gave me a tight hug. He kept repeating, "I can't believe it. I can't believe Ben would do this after everything this family has already been through." I replied, "Some people are just good, son, and your friend's father is the kind that shows up when we need it most." Jay pulled away a bit, wiped his face, and said he felt guilty thinking about Ben having to spend money because of what Kay had done. I reminded him he did this because he wanted to. It's not charity or pity, it's family looking out for family. Jay agreed, but I could see he was still trying to process everything. He asked if I thought Leo would be happy to know about the trip. I replied, "I'm sure he would, and I bet he'd be picking a fight with you guys if you gave up." The next morning, I woke up to voices coming downstairs. I went down and saw Jay excited in the kitchen with Derek and Lucas. Everyone was talking loudly, interrupting each other with excitement. Ben had called everyone the night before to give them the news. Lucas said, "My mom cried when she heard he was going to do this." Derek added, "My parents tried to help with money, but he said he wanted to do it all himself, that this was his way of honoring his son, and he wouldn't accept anyone paying for anything." They were already full of plans for what to bring and what to do on the trip. Jay was a different person compared to last night. The spark had come back to him. I felt an enormous relief seeing my son laughing with his friends, excited again after so much sadness. When they left for school, my phone rang. I saw my wife's name and almost ignored it, but I answered on the fourth call. Her voice was tired, tense. She just said a quiet, "Hello?" She asked to talk, but I noticed immediately by her tone that things weren't going as well as she expected at her sister's house. In the background, I could hear the mess of children and the TV at full volume. I asked what she wanted to talk about. She just said, "I miss you. I can't take this anymore. I don't know what to do." I felt the anger wanting to return because she was the one who created all this when she chose to protect Kay instead of doing what was right. Even so, I took a deep breath and replied, "I'll only talk if you're willing to make Kay return or pay back what she took from Jay." On the other end, total silence. I thought she had hung up because of how long it took until she finally answered, "I need more time. Kay is still doing very poorly with everything. I don't want to demand anything from her right now." I didn't say another word. I hung up without even saying goodbye. Enough. It was always the same discussion. She continued choosing not to hold Kay accountable, always making excuses and letting time pass as if it would resolve itself. But it wouldn't. Jay would never forget everything they did to him, and I will never erase from my memory the scene of my son with a broken heart at the police station. My wife chose her daughter. She preferred to cover up the mistake, and that said it all. I set the phone aside and went back to work. I will only have any conversation with her again when she is truly ready to fix what Kay destroyed. Later, when Jay got home from class, he came in with a huge smile, dropped his backpack, and took a piece of paper out of his pocket. It was the trip itinerary, very detailed and printed. Ben had planned every detail of the weekend. They were going to Leo's favorite trail on Saturday, camp there, and at night they would make a bonfire where each one would tell stories and memories of their friend. At the end of the itinerary, there was a note asking them to bring photos if they had any, because he wanted to see his son through his friend's eyes and remember the best moments. I read it all twice. You could feel the affection in every detail, in every part of the plan. Jay sat next to me on the couch and confessed, "I'm nervous about this trip. I know it's going to affect me a lot, but I'm glad I'm going." He thanked me for being included, for being able to help keep his friend's memory alive, and said, "His dad treating me like family means everything to me, even more after what my own family did to me." I put my arm around his shoulders and said, "You have every right to feel hurt. What happened to you was wrong, and nothing changes that. But try to also look at who is by your side. Your friend's father is ready to help, and these friends never left you alone. People who show what real family is." Jay nodded and leaned against me. He said, "I'm lucky to have Ben in my life. Losing Leo was the worst thing that could have happened, but having his dad around makes everything feel less heavy." I agreed, and we sat in silence. The next day, he would go to class, and on the weekend, he would head out on the trip. Meanwhile, Kay and my wife were the ones who would have to face the consequences of what they did. 2 days before the trip, almost at lunchtime, I received a call from an unknown number. For some reason, I decided to answer. A woman on the other end introduced herself as Sarah's sister, where they were staying. She apologized right away for calling, but said she really needed to tell me something that was happening there between Kay and Sarah. I went out to the yard, away from everyone, to hear better. She was visibly bothered. I could tell she only called because she felt she couldn't ignore the situation anymore. She told me that Kay was receiving packages every day at the house. It wasn't just a little, it was several deliveries a day. She continued to spend by shopping online as if nothing had happened. When the sister confronted her, Kay just replied, "I'm just using the money that was mine, that was saved." But her aunt didn't believe her. She told me, "Sarah couldn't even look me in the eye when she said that." At that moment, I felt my jaw tighten. Of course Kay was still spending beyond her means. She simply couldn't help herself. The sister continued, saying her daughter witnessed Kay's credit card being declined at a store the day before. Kay had a breakdown in the parking lot, burst into tears, and started screaming, saying that nothing was working out and everything was against her. The niece felt so awkward that she preferred to wait in the car until Kay calmed down enough to drive back home. The sister commented that she was worried about how much debt Kay was getting into and that my wife was simply closing her eyes to the situation. Every time the sister tried to talk about it, my wife would change the subject or make up an excuse. She said the daughter didn't need judgment, but support, that she was going through a hard time and it was best if no one pressured her. The sister said she loved her sibling but was indignant to see her enabling everything. She had seen this script before and knew it didn't end well. I told her how much I valued her care and sincerity with me, even knowing it put her in a delicate situation with my wife. She responded that she just wanted someone to know what was really going on. After we hung up, I stood outside for a while. Knowing that Kay continued to spend irresponsibly didn't exactly surprise me, but it made me increasingly angry. She had stolen from Jay, never paid for it, and was now accumulating a debt larger than she could imagine paying while my wife turned a blind eye. On the night before the trip, Jay appeared in the living room with his backpack ready. He had spent over an hour in his room getting everything organized to the smallest detail. He took a sheet of paper from the front pocket and handed it to me, saying it was the letter he wanted to read at the memorial and that he needed someone to check if it was okay. I opened the paper and began to read. Right in the first line, he spoke about how his friend always made everyone laugh, even in the hardest times, and how he had a special way of making everyone feel important. Jay wrote about memories they shared, like staying up late playing video games during vacations, or when his friend convinced him to participate in the school play, even though he was dying of embarrassment. He said his friend stayed by his side when things got heavy at home. In the letter, he said how much he missed him. He thought about his friend every day and wanted one more chance to say he was the best friend he ever had. When I reached the end, I felt my eyes sting. I had to blink to keep the tears from falling. I could barely finish reading. Emotion tightened my throat. Every sentence had a maturity and an affection hard to see in a boy his age. That was my son, the boy who worked in a pizzeria and saved every cent just to honor his friend. Jay sat next to me and said he had been thinking a lot about family and what it really meant. He looked at me with a seriousness that wasn't common to see in him and said, "My friend's father gave me more affection in one phone call than Kay and Mom combined when I needed it." It hurt to hear that, but it was impossible to deny. He was right. Ben stayed by his side when his own family turned their backs. Jay said he was starting to understand that real family isn't just blood, but those who stay by our side during the bad times, those who support us when no one else cares. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "I'm very proud of you, not just for how you handled everything with Kay, but for the incredible man you were becoming." On Saturday, very early, I heard a van stop in front of the house. Jay was on his feet, backpack on his back, just waiting. I went with him to the sidewalk to greet Ben. He got out of the van, shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eyes with kindness, and said, "You raised an incredible boy. My son loved Jay like a brother, and for me it means everything to see him keeping his friend's memory alive this way." I thanked him for including Jay in the trip and for everything he was doing for him. He just nodded and said, "The boys were my son's family. Now they are my family too." Jay got into the van where the other boys were already excited, talking loudly. It was hard to even understand what they were saying. Ben took the wheel, and I watched as they drove away. With Jay gone, I spent the weekend busy. I cleaned the house, vacuumed, did laundry, and took care of the dishes, everything to avoid keeping my head full of bad thoughts. The silence was heavy without Jay at home. Every room pulled a memory. Kay's empty room, the place where Jay's money was hidden, the living room where my wife and I had our last fight before she left. I kept ruminating on everything that happened, thinking about how much my wife preferred to protect Kay, how much she lied to the police to cover for her daughter, and how much she continued ignoring Kay's mistakes even as everything got worse. I wasn't ready to look for my wife as long as she continued to enable Kay. Nothing had changed. Kay hadn't returned anything, hadn't paid Jay back, and my wife still wouldn't admit her mistake. On Sunday afternoon, I was folding clothes in the living room when I saw a car park outside. I looked through the window and saw my wife getting out of her sister's car, exhausted, with deep dark circles under her eyes and crumpled clothes as if she hadn't even slept properly. She knocked on the door even though she still had a key. When I opened it, we stood for a second without saying anything. She said, "I can't take this anymore. This separation is destroying me. I miss you." I made room for her to enter, and she sat heavily on the couch. I stayed standing. I asked if Kay had returned the things or paid Jay. She lowered her head and said Kay hadn't done either. When I asked why she had come then, she got angry. She said I was being too hard, holding a grudge, punishing her just for trying to protect her daughter. I felt anger rise, but I kept my calm. I said, "This isn't a matter of holding a grudge. Kay stole from Jay, and you lied to the police to cover it up. As long as there isn't a real consequence for what Kay did, there's no way to pretend everything is okay between us." She looked at me fixedly for a while and became increasingly irritated. She said, "Kay is going through a hard time. Making her return everything or pay will only make the situation even more humiliating for her in front of everyone." At that moment, I felt my jaw harden, and I remembered that Jay had been humiliated at the station when she lied to the officer and made it seem like he was making up the theft. Her face turned red and she got up from the couch saying, "You care more about being right than about our marriage, and you're willing to throw everything away because of it." I stood up too and replied, "What I want is to show our children that actions have consequences, that no one can simply ignore it when someone steals from the family and then lies to the police." She grabbed her bag from the coffee table and went straight to the door. I said, "When you want to do what's right, you know where to find me." She slammed the door so hard that even the photos on the wall shook. Later that evening, I was sitting on the couch when I heard a car arriving. I looked through the window and saw the van, Ben parking it. Jay got out of the passenger seat with his backpack hanging over one shoulder. His face was tired, but there was a peace there that I hadn't seen in a long time. I opened the door before he could knock, and he came straight into the living room, dropped his bag next to the couch, and slumped down, tired. I asked how it went. He stood still for a moment, quiet, and only then began to speak. He said they went up to a high place on the hillside where Leo liked to watch the sunset. It took them almost 2 hours to get up there, but they said it was worth it. They stayed until the sun disappeared around the fire, each sharing the best memories they had. As Jay spoke, his voice became soft and emotional, his eyes watering. He said Ben cried a lot when they started reading the letters, but it wasn't a cry of sadness. It seemed like the relief of someone who can let go of something heavy that had been stored for a long time. The boys hugged, cried together, and Ben said, "My son would be happy to see that his friends care like this." They decided right there that they were going to turn it into a tradition, returning every year on his birthday to keep his memory alive. Jay leaned back on the couch, rubbed his eyes, and mentioned that Ben had asked what was happening at home. Jay told him everything about Kay taking the money and about my wife lying to the police. Ben listened to everything until the end and said something that marked Jay. "Sometimes the ones who should protect you end up disappointing you. But that doesn't change who you are. It only shows who those people really are." Jay looked at me and said, "It moved me to hear that, especially coming from someone who lost his own son and still cares about others." In the following days, I saw Jay walking around the house differently, more firm, without the look of someone who had given up on life. On Tuesday, during dinner, he said, "This trip made me understand one thing, Dad. I thought family was only those with the same blood, but now I know that real family is who stays by your side in the worst hours." Ben supported him when his stepmother and sister disappeared, and his friends pooled money for him to go, even after Kay had taken what was his. Those were his family now. Wednesday morning, I was at work when the phone rang. A strange number. I almost didn't answer. When I did, a woman asked if I was Kay's father. I said I was her stepfather and asked who was calling. She explained she was from a collection agency. She wanted to speak with Kay about an overdue credit card and asked if I knew how to find her because she wasn't answering calls or letters. I explained that I was separated from her mother and had no contact with either of them. She thanked me and hung up. I stared at my phone, realizing that Kay's money problem was much bigger than just the $400 she took from Jay. That afternoon, the phone rang again. Another unknown number, another collector, this time for a bounced check at a clothing store. I gave the same answer. I said I didn't know anything. By the time I got home, there had been 3 more calls that day alone, all after Kay because of debt. Friday morning, I had barely finished breakfast and they had already called me again. 2 different collectors trying to reach Kay. That week already totaled 5 calls, everyone after her. I didn't reach out to my wife to talk about these calls because it was no longer my role to protect Kay from the choices she made. If she had that much debt, it was on her. I put my phone on silent and focused on ensuring Jay had everything he needed. Each call I let go to voicemail and deleted without listening. The problem was hers, not mine. 4 days after the last one, the phone rang again, but this time it was a familiar number. It was Sarah's sister. I thought about not answering. I thought it was to fight with me for being hard on Kay or to say my wife was unhappy, but I answered anyway. She sounded tense and asked if I had a minute. I said yes. She took a deep breath and warned me. Things have gotten complicated here. Kay received a court summons because of credit card debt, and they sent it here because she used our address for her mail. She said, I don't want to get involved in your family problems, but I thought you should know. Your wife only realized the size of Kay's debts when she saw the summons. The sister told me that Kay tried to hide the letter, but her daughter Grace saw it and told everything. When the sister went to ask, Kay couldn't take it and broke down. She admitted she owed money to several companies. She said, your wife turned white instantly. It looked like she had been punched when she found out everything. I thanked her and asked how much the debt was. She was quiet for a while and said, I don't know for sure, but it's in the thousands. And then came the real shock. She told me that my wife was desperate because some time ago she had co-signed for one of the cards, thinking she was helping her daughter build credit. Now, my wife and Kay were being charged together for debts that already totaled thousands of dollars. The card company was after both of them, and my wife simply had no way to cover all of it. The sister said my wife spent the previous night crying and looking at bank statements, trying to find a way out of the whole situation. I sat with the phone in my hands, taken by a strange mix of feelings. Part of me felt a certain relief because everything was finally coming to light and people were seeing what I had already been facing for a long time. But at the same time, I worried about my wife, who was now feeling the weight of the consequences of having covered for Kay for so long. She had spent years defending Kay from any consequence, however small, and now she was dealing with a massive problem. I thanked her sister for the call and asked her to let me know if there was any news. She said she would, and added that she hoped we could all resolve this somehow. After hanging up, I sat there on the couch, staring at the wall for a long time. Jay arrived from work an hour later, and I immediately noticed something different about him. He arrived more confident, with a calmer face than I remembered from the past few weeks. He dropped his backpack near the door and said he had received his paycheck. I asked what he thought about doing with the money, and he replied that he wanted to open an account at another bank. That very night, I took him to a credit union on the other side of town. We sat with an employee who helped Jay fill out the paperwork to open a savings account. He deposited his entire salary and asked about the debit card. The employee explained that the card would arrive in the mail within a week. On the way back, he mentioned he had learned his lesson about keeping money in his room. He said he never imagined someone from his own family could take money from him, but now he was smarter. He also said that Ben had been sending him messages all the time, wanting to know how he was and sending photos from the trip. There were photos of the sunset in the mountains, of the fire they made, and he showed me everything on his phone, including a photo of the boys together, all hugging. Jay commented on how good it was to have an adult in his life who treated him with respect and really cared about his feelings. Ben sent messages every few days asking for news about work, school, or just saying he missed him. Jay said that meant more to him than I could imagine. 3 weeks after the theft, I was preparing dinner when the phone rang. It was my wife, and I almost didn't answer, but I ended up picking up on the 4th ring and heard her crying hard on the other end. She couldn't even speak properly from crying so much. When she finally could, she said that her sister had asked her and Kay to leave the house. The collectors were relentless with the calls, and it was disrupting the family. Grace was getting nervous with the phone ringing all the time, and the husband couldn't stand dealing with the situation anymore. The sister made it clear she loved my wife, but now they needed to find another place to stay. My wife confessed she didn't know what to do. She didn't have money to pay for a place alone, and Kay's debts were enormous. The desperation was clear in her voice, but I maintained my position. I said I was sorry for what she was going through, but that it had been her choice to protect Kay from responsibility. She cried even more and admitted she never imagined things would go this far. I said I would be willing to talk about her coming home, but only if Kay actually took steps to change, go back to therapy, get a job, commit to paying the debts, and return Jay's money. My wife went silent. I could only hear her breathing, and it took a while before she responded. Finally, she said she would talk to Kay about all of it, but her voice came out low and defeated. You could see she was finally realizing that protecting Kay from consequences didn't help anyone, not even Kay herself. 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Kay. I looked at the screen for a few seconds before answering. She spoke softly, her voice trembling, completely different from the defiant way she acted the day I confronted her about the theft. She apologized for taking Jay's money and for everything that happened afterward. She said it all quickly, almost as if she had rehearsed it. I sat at the kitchen table and just listened to her cry on the other end. When she stopped, I thanked her for the apology, but warned her that words alone are not enough. She needed to show through actions that she was taking responsibility, get a job, and start paying Jay back cent by cent. Kay went silent. I could only hear her breathing. Then she said she understood and that she had already left resumes in several places and even had an interview at a store scheduled for the following week. She seemed truly repentant, but I was already used to her promises that never came true. I told her I hoped this time it was for real, and we hung up. Jay arrived from work an hour later. I told him about Kay's call and he just shook his head before going to his room without much talk. Over the weekend, my wife called asking if she could come talk face to face. I agreed, and she arrived. Sarah showed up on Saturday afternoon, looking smaller, withdrawn, with stress etched into every gesture. We sat in the living room, and she started talking before I could say a word. She told me she had thought a lot about everything she had done regarding Kay over all these years. She admitted she had enabled Kay's behavior because she felt guilty about the divorce. She wanted to be a present mother and thought that protecting Kay was the same as loving her, but now she saw that this had turned into permissiveness and harmed Kay herself, who never learned to be responsible. Seeing her daughter sink into debt and the impact it caused everyone was a reality check she could no longer run from. She looked at me with red eyes and asked if I would consider couples therapy. She also wanted to know if Kay could move back home, but this time under strict rules. She would have to work, pay rent, and follow the rules, including paying Jay back. I said I needed to think and talk to Jay before deciding anything, because his well-being was what mattered most, and I wasn't going to make any family decisions without hearing what he had to say. She agreed, saying she understood the situation, and commented that Jay had every right to have a say after what he went through. We spent another hour talking about what the conditions would be and how to ensure they were respected. Before dinner, she left, and I spent the rest of the night thinking about how to tell Jay. Later, I found him in his room doing homework. I sat on the edge of the bed and told him about the conversation with his mother. I explained that Kay had called to apologize and that his mother wanted to try to resolve things with therapy and very clear rules. Jay stopped what he was doing, looked at me, and said he felt insecure but didn't totally rule out their return. He just wanted to see real change from Kay and not just empty promises. He also said he insisted on having his own lock on his bedroom door. I agreed immediately. I said it was more than fair and that if we decided to allow them back, we would install the lock beforehand. Jay went back to his homework. I thought the conversation was over, but he looked at me again and mentioned he had spoken with Ben about these family issues. Ben explained that forgiving isn't about forgetting or allowing someone to hurt you again, but rather about protecting yourself while opening space for others to change. Jay said that made sense to him and that he wanted to learn to protect himself better from now on. I put my hand on his shoulder and told him how proud I was of the maturity he was showing. He gave a small smile and commented that Ben was helping a lot to put his thoughts in order. Looking at Jay, I felt something different, seeing his effort to face this whole situation. Most kids his age would be rebellious or bitter, but he was trying to think about what was best for everyone. I reinforced how much I admired his maturity and made it clear that we were going to move slowly, without any rush. If Kay and her mother returned, it would be with fixed rules and real consequences if boundaries were crossed. No second chances without responsibility. Jay just nodded. He said it seemed fair and soon went back to his homework. I left his room feeling that maybe we could overcome this, but only if everyone did their part. A week later, my phone buzzed with a message from Kay about her paycheck at the store where she started working. At the end of the message, she said $50 was going straight to Jay as the first installment of what she owed. I stared at the screen for a while, not quite knowing how to react. The amount was small compared to the $400 debt, but it was something concrete. When Jay got home from school, I showed him the message. He barely reacted, just said, "Okay," and went to make a sandwich. I could tell he was waiting to see if this would continue or if Kay would quit after the first paycheck, as she had done with other jobs before. That night, my wife called me asking if I would agree to do couples therapy with her. She said she found a therapist specializing in blended families and there was an opening for the following week. I accepted because I knew we needed help to relearn how to communicate. For a long time, we had only been arguing without actually listening to each other. The first session was on a Tuesday night in a small office that smelled like lavender. The therapist, a woman in her 50s, asked each of us to explain what brought us there. My wife started by saying she felt torn between her daughter and me. I spoke next, saying the theft and the lie to the police had destroyed my trust. The therapist listened carefully and pointed out that we were making decisions without truly talking. My wife had been protecting Kay from consequences, and I had been issuing ultimatums without seeking solutions together. She said that if we wanted to fix the relationship, both would have to work on it. By the next session, we had to practice active listening, trying to truly understand what the other meant instead of just defending our own side. It was strange at first, but it soon became clear how stuck we were on being right that we had stopped listening. My wife admitted she enabled Kay because she felt guilty about the divorce and was trying to compensate. I acknowledged that I was so hurt by what happened to Jay that I only thought about immediate justice. We left the first session feeling vulnerable, but with hope that a path existed if both truly committed to the process. 2 weeks later, Kay sent another payment to Jay, another $50, along with a note saying she was keeping her promise. Jay deposited the money and thanked her via message, but he didn't talk to me much about it. However, I could tell he was starting to believe that this time, Kay might actually be trying to change. My wife told me that Kay had started therapy to deal with her spending and impulsivity issues. The therapist was helping her understand why she felt the urge to buy whenever she had money and how to break that cycle. My wife seemed hopeful, thinking that Kay was finally taking everything seriously. No more excuses. After a month of therapy, and with Kay paying what she owed on time, I told my wife I accepted them moving back home, as long as everyone agreed to the rules. Kay would have to sign a written agreement with the terms, and after finishing paying Jay back, she would start contributing to the rent and continue her other payments. My wife agreed and said Kay was ready to follow any condition imposed. We spent a night writing the agreement together, and Kay signed it without complaining. She said she understood the need for it and wanted to show she could be trustworthy again. I had a new lock installed on Jay's door before they moved back. He wanted that guarantee, and I wasn't going to argue. During the first week back, the atmosphere was strange, a bit uncomfortable. Kay barely left her room, except when she had to work or eat dinner. At dinner, she was polite, but she'd finish and go straight back to her room. My wife forced a bit of a sense of normalcy, talking loudly, trying to bring up any topic, but that only made things more tense. Jay and I would exchange looks, especially when she started talking about some TV show or a new recipe she wanted to try. Everyone knew we were just keeping up appearances and hoping deep down that things would actually get better and not just look good on the outside. Jay remained somewhat distant from Kay, but he was polite when they bumped into each other in the kitchen or hallway. I watched closely during those times, and I could see that he was actually testing whether Kay's change was for real or just a phase. Jay would ask about work, she would answer, and soon one of them would find an excuse to leave. It wasn't hostility, but it was far from comfortable. It was clear that Jay was protecting himself, not letting Kay get close until he was sure over time that she had truly changed. One night he told me that Ben taught him that it's okay to be cautious with someone who has hurt you before. You can give a new chance, but you don't need to open your heart completely right away. 2 months after everything happened, Kay finally paid off the debt to Jay. She handed him $100 in cash and apologized for taking so long. Jay counted it all out, the $400 spread across the kitchen table. Then he transferred the money to his bank app on his phone, saying almost nothing. Kay seemed to expect some extra word, maybe that everything was okay between them, but Jay just nodded and went to his room. My wife was disappointed that a big emotional moment of forgiveness or reconciliation didn't happen. Later, I had to remind her that this payment was only the first step. It didn't erase what happened, nor did it fix their relationship overnight. Later that night, Jay sat on the couch next to me while I watched TV. He thanked Kay for paying and keeping her word, but said that wasn't enough for everything to go back to normal or for them to be close like before. He said that maybe with time, who knows, he could rebuild trust, but that it would take a long time and depended on much more than money. Jay wanted to see that Kay had truly changed as a person, not just that she paid the debt so she wouldn't be rejected. I told him that was more than fair and that he had every right to decide how he wanted to relate to Kay from that point on. No one could force him to trust her again or force a closeness if he wasn't ready. He actually seemed relieved to hear those words. Ben started calling every week, always setting up a dinner. After these meetings, Jay would come home lighter. It seemed like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He said they talked about Leo, remembered stories of the two of them, but also talked about simple things like school or what was happening at the pizzeria. Ben treated Jay like someone important, showing that his feelings and opinions had value. It was beautiful to see my son regain trust in adults after everything that happened with Kay and my wife. These dinners soon became a special time that Jay looked forward to, and I silently thanked this man for staying present in my son's life, even with all the grief he also carried. My wife and I stayed firm with therapy every week. The therapist made us practice talking about Kay and Jay without getting defensive or cutting the subject off. We really needed to listen to each other and not just wait for a turn to argue back. Gradually, we learned to act as partners again, instead of against each other. Therapy taught us that we had to agree on rules and consequences before talking to the children, not after, when it was already too late. My wife admitted she had a hard time saying no because of divorce guilt, and I recognized that I would lock up when I thought I was right. We both learned that acting together doesn't always mean each person gets everything their way, but it ensures more consistency and justice for the kids. 3 months after Kay started working, she was promoted to shift supervisor. When she got home, she told everyone. Instead of locking herself in her room like she used to, she was clearly proud of herself in a way I had never seen. She talked about training the newcomers and setting schedules. You could feel the spark in her eyes because finally she was someone her colleagues trusted. For the first time, I saw Kay taking real responsibility without playing the victim or blaming anyone when something went wrong. My wife cried with happiness after Kay went to sleep, and I had to admit it was a relief to see our daughter maturing. Finally, 6 months after the theft and the whole crisis, the family was able to eat dinner together most nights. Jay continued to lock his room and keep his distance from Kay, but the two of them could be in the same room without that heavy atmosphere. Kay was working full-time and doing therapy twice a month to learn how to handle money better. My wife and I continued therapy, but we moved back into the same room and could even talk at night about our day. It wasn't a TV commercial family, but it was functioning like a family should. Jay had his space and his dinners with Ben. Kay focused on her work and treatment, and my wife and I rebuilt trust in our own way, step by step. Ben remained an essential part of this story, reminding everyone that family isn't just a matter of blood. Real love is holding those who make mistakes accountable, but it's also allowing the person to grow and transform. Sometimes the family we choose is just as valuable as the family we are born into. And at certain moments, doing the right thing means letting the consequences happen, even if it hurts everyone.